Welcome everyone to the April installment of the Grand Rapids User Group. This month, we are going to focus on the state of accessibility in 2022. We revisit this topic from time to time as the state of the art changes and we get new tools and new guidelines to follow. And we always like to turn to our local expert, Ashley Helminiak, who will be telling us about findings coming out of the recent AXCON conference. And take it away, Ashley.
All right. I'm Ashley Helminiak, Accessibility Lead for Rapid Development Group. And I do have some slides to assist me so we don't ramble too much. And so I realized I also didn't put in a slide saying what accessibility is. So I guess just a quick rundown as far as digital accessibility. It's someone who has a permanent, temporary, or situational impediment that impairs their ability to use a website in a way that is considered, neurotypical or normative. So that could be something like a cognitive disorder or motor impairment, or even being on like a very crowded bus or subway, or let's say you broke your hand or have carpal tunnel acting up. So for different situations for those. So things that I just want to talk about today kind of formed based on a lot of things that I heard when I was attending AXCON just last month. So kind of the latest in accessibility, and then kind of pairing that with what's going on with Drupal and accessibility, and then what can we do to make steps towards improving accessibility in our own work and on our own websites. So the accessibility landscape. There are several different angles for this. Well, let's just skip one. There we go. First, talking about the legal landscape. And so we know that the amount of demand letters and lawsuits is going up. We heard about Robles versus Domino's reaching all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's been steadily on the rise, even after a slight dip in 2020. When the initial pandemic uncertainty kind of resurged as, okay, it's more important than ever that sites be accessible, not only to be legally compliant, but just also to maintain your customer base and keep your clients happy. And large amounts of these are actually coming from California and New York, and also Florida, but mainly California and New York are most likely to see where you're most likely to see a lot of those demand letters and lawsuits coming from, because they also have additional disability and human rights acts in place to enforce. So that's something to consider if you are working on sites where they do business in those states, or also just anywhere that doesn't have the same legislation as the United States as a whole on the federal level, kind of making sure you're a little bit familiar with those so you can make sure you're following the standards that they have in place. As far as legislation goes, unfortunately, we're still stuck in a place where we, it's kind of, does digital accessibility fall under the ADA, which came out in 1990. And unfortunately, at that time, websites weren't such a thing that they ever crafted any language for digital accessibility in the ADA. So the big question in the courts when lawsuits are brought up are, does this particular situation apply to the ADA? Basically, do they have a brick and mortar presence? And the increasingly the decision has been, if they have a brick and mortar presence anywhere, then their digital accessibility also falls under the ADA. And so Obama's administration was actually working on crafting some legislation around digital accessibility, but they didn't get very far. And then Trump's administration threw that away. And then Biden's administration has promised to bring it back, but in the short term, it's not looking like that's going to happen during this term of his presidency anyway. So what we have to look forward to are more demand letters and lawsuits, and the fact that the Department of Justice has demonstrated they are committed to strictly enforcing digital accessibility cases. So they are in general on the side of enforcing digital accessibility under the ADA, but they're still down to things in the courts versus a specific legislation that you can refer to. And also a lot of legislation at state and federal level has been stuck at WCAG 2.0, which is several years old already. And I think 2.1 came out in 2018, if I recall correctly. So a lot of the legislation is several years behind as far as which standard to adhere to. So for us, we don't want to be looking backwards. We do want to be looking at least to the present and forwards, because a lot of the new versions of WCAG that come out are going to have all of what's in the older standards plus some new beneficial criteria. This keeps skipping slides on me. All right. So what's new in WCAG? So Worldwide Consortium Accessibility Guidelines 2.2 has been around for a while, but it's not been officially adapted as the latest standard, but it is kind of finalized enough. We've been following it for a while at Rapid, and it is expected to become the official latest standard by the end of the year. But the biggest thing with WCAG is that 3.0 is officially in draft form. And this is going to be a complete overhaul of the methods of evaluation and levels of compliance. So if you've ever seen like a demand letter or anything, it probably cites different criteria, or automated testing says you're failing, WCAG 2.3.1 or something like that. That is all going to change in 3.0. And as
Ashley, does compliance of a newer version imply compliance of an older version?
As if we're talking 2.2 and below, then yes. But 3.0 is going to be a whole new ball game. Instead of having like level A critical, AA important, and AAA like nice to have, that's going to be completely scrapped, and it's not going to be such a pass fail for each set of criteria. So they have said that they hope to map over a lot of the criteria to the 3.0 format, but it's going to be a little bit more of like a guided overall view of things. So instead of like there's an error on the page, you're not compliant, it's going to be kind of percentage levels of compliance. So kind of like a rating system. So, and they'll have like a threshold that might be like 90%. Like, so you evaluate your page. If there's fewer than 10% errors for that particular thing, then you'll still be considered compliant, but less than that, then you'll have failed and have to bring it up. So it'll be a little bit more understanding in that sense, especially for people with content management systems, and not everything is in your control. But we still have a responsibility to not only build an accessible CMS system, but also equip content admins with what they need to be entering and building accessible content. So kind of already mentioned the legislation as well. So WCAG 3.0 isn't expected to really come out before 2028. So we do have a while, but it's already, the beginning skeleton of it is already out there. So I think if we start following it as it develops, then that will help us be ready for when it does come out. And since we know that legislation is usually several years behind, we probably can't expect anything to be citing 3.0 until the 2030s.
So just, if you don't mind interruptions, just to follow up on Jonathan's question. So that being the case, is is it possible that they are contradictory, where you could do something and be 2.2 compliant, but doing it that way would like be prohibitive of being 3.0 compliant?
That should not be the case. I mean, 3.0 isn't developed enough for me to be able to point to any instance of that, but they're going to try to map things over how they can, but in general, there's not going to be any, like, I think they're going to call them methods or techniques. Like, there's not going to be anything that's going to sing in a prior version, unless that prior version is discovered to have accessibility barriers of its own. So, but mapping it will be kind of difficult. I'm sure they'll have something that says this relates to, 1.1.4, but it'll change, how demand letters and lawsuits work, and it will change how automated testing works. So we'll have to see what types of, third-party companies that make those kinds of tools. We'll have to see how they keep up. So yeah, in the accessibility community, there's a growing push to destigmatize people with disabilities and not counting their needs as separate from other people. So especially since the definition of disability, which is something that the ADA actually went through its whole legal battle. Like, it wasn't until 2008 that the ADA actually had a more proper definition of people with disabilities. And that's still something that sometimes comes into question when people are trying to figure out whether or not something's enforceable under the ADA. But in general, like, viewing people with disabilities whose needs need to be met separate from, the rest of us is something that we should be moving away from, since people are all different in different ways. And so people with like ADHD, that's a person with a disability, but it might not be someone you think of as versus someone who's blind or has a cognitive impairment, but there is a whole host of things that we wouldn't even think about as a disability. And just learning to build things that work for a whole variety of use cases and is just going to be a better way to go forward, especially with the next point that I have, that overlays claiming to fix websites are the root of all evil. That is always brought up negatively in the accessibility community. So I won't name any plays here, but a lot of companies, they might get a demand letter or see other companies within their industry getting sued for different accessibility violations, and they might panic, and then they see this ad for, here's an overlay that will fix your website and make it accessible for everybody. But that in and of itself is not true. Overlays are only so smart, and if the underlying product is bad, an overlay cannot fix that product and may incorrectly interpret things happening on the website. So in general, it usually makes things worse. And there's also been court cases that have determined that companies that build a separate site or have an overlay on their site for people with disabilities are doing like the separate but equal kind of segregation of the disability community. And they're saying that it does not fall under, that's not how you would provide an equal access in digital accessibility. So overlays, I think, are going to be kind of hopefully losing popularity as it becomes more apparent that the courts aren't going to stand by that as a solution. And it does put more pressure on us to make sure that underlying websites and products are built well. And then also just hearing a lot at AXCON, different ways to push for inclusion, hiring people with different abilities than what you would think, so you can help gain their perspective and they can bring fresh angles and ways of thinking to your design and development processes, and including people with disabilities in research and testing processes. So obviously, some companies are small. You can't just go, I'm going to go, make sure we have, 30% people of personnel with a disability of some kind. But if you can't do that, then including people with disabilities in research and testing can be a way to talk to them more and really get a front row seat to interacting with things in a way you may not expect. So Drupal and accessibility. So the conference I attended was not Drupal specific, but there are things that have been happening in Drupal over time for accessibility that has been a little later than I would have thought. More intentional accessibility improvements didn't come around until Drupal 7, but now there's really a strong accessibility team that works on Drupal core, and people also bring some major contributed module issues to them as well. And they also have many resources that help evaluate website accessibility for people. And they did a lot of work for Drupal 8 and 9 to have some good accessibility and SEO things out of the box. So as far as contributed modules, accessibility for those tends to be all over the board, and that kind of is dependent on maintainers and how widely adapted they are and what types of issues are submitted and resolved, which is kind of what you can expect with an open source community. So when you're using contributed modules, you should kind of evaluate both the administrative and end user sides of a module that you intend to use. So something that may often get overlooked in Drupal is assuming that the administrative side is going to be accessible. And that's not necessarily true, especially if someone's bolting on a lot of fancy extra things. And content administrators are clients and end users too in their own way. They just have a different role than the public facing users do. So there is this D8AX hashtag. So there's probably going to be a D9 one coming out as well, but basically D8 accessible experience. That's something that some modules you can add, and it's not like yes, it is accessible, but ones that have that on there, they've at least demonstrated a commitment to accessibility and kind of pushed for people to find and report any accessibility issues. So it can be a way, if you're comparing modules and something has that and something doesn't, then you could maybe consider this one, the one that has the hashtag over the one that does not.
Pledge from the developer, not an award given to the developer.
Yes, it's something you would add on your own. So it's definitely not like this is officially accessible, especially since things are changing time. So. All right, so there are many modules out there for accessibility as well. So content administration, so editorially and automatic alternative text, which I would never use that, but it is a possibility. Automatic alternative text is something that uses AI to generate an image alt text, but it's something that you should never just rely on that. You should be, intelligently making something up yourself. And since we can't, you can tell clients how to use that, but you can't make them do their own evaluation. For me, that's sort of a tool that can be easily abused. So, but I suppose if you have content administrators that are never putting alts on, it would be better than nothing. So there's also modules that do theme level changes like style switcher and text resize. Those can give you some power to do some different things for, like, if you want to present dark mode or high contrast mode. But there are media queries that do that now. So that's not ones that we often at Rapid. We're a little more, we like to have the ultimate control. So we don't often rely on modules like that. But those are some audit tools that modules have. And there's a link down here. I've got links kind of sprinkled throughout my slides if we want to make them available afterwards, if anyone wanted to read more on anything. So yeah, just in general, not only for accessibility, but for any modules, like consider the administrative, end user, and developer needs when choosing which modules to use. So trying to evaluate what you actually need. So if you only have like 1 or 2 content admins that are easily trained and going to work hard to make their content accessible, you might not need some of the helper content administration modules. Or like, we at Rapid probably wouldn't use theme level ones, or like if you have your own separate set of audit tools. So just evaluating what your actual needs are instead of just bolting everything on and thinking like, yes, I'm doing everything, might not be the best way to go. So what can we do to improve our own site's accessibility? One is identify your champions. So hopefully there's more than one. And I don't mean that as in like more than one with the job title. I mean, just more than one person who cares. And if there is no one who cares, be that person and try to make more people care. So raising awareness and learning to champion accessibility throughout your work processes is one of the best things you can do just right off the bat. And then 2, we could learn how to audit. Auditing our own work and other people's work, it helps you not only identify issues, but start learning the patterns of how things should work. So then after a while, you don't even have to think about it too much. You just automatically know like, oh, that component needs these ARIA attributes, or I can't forget to format my error text or my inputs and labels the correct way. So here's just a short list of some potential automated testing tools. I've used all of these and they're all good in different ways. So Wave kind of gives you a quick error snapshot. Axe Tools goes a little bit more in depth. And if you pay for a pro account, you also get some intelligence guided testing where it helps you through a series of and also Accessibility Insights for Web does something very similar, but is open source. So that can be very nice as well. And it can also assist you with things like manual testing, like your focus order would help you. That would help you with keyboard navigation, and then also learning to turn on your screen reader and kind of interact with elements and see lists of links and headings just to see if your page is properly structured. And there's also checklists and guided testing that some of these automated testings have as an offering. Drupal also has its own accessibility checklist that you can look for as well. But just learning how to evaluate for accessibility is one of the big things that can actually help teach you about it. 3, identify error patterns. So as you're testing, you're probably starting to learn. I know I started learning a lot of the same types of things started coming up, and kind of the small fix, big wins. So there's like some low hanging fruit in accessibility testing and remediation. So there might be one type of issue that you fix that cancels out like 40 errors on your page. For example, if your page has like 24 cards that all say learn more on them, and you give all of those a unique link name, you've just eliminated 24 errors and made your page look a lot cleaner by doing one type of fix. So that's kind of one of the big things that can come out of testing, other than learning how things should be, but just learning where your own weaknesses are. So 4, learn, train, ingrain. So learn how to fix, and then if it's not just you that's involved, train the relevant team members how to implement the correct solution and ingrain the knowledge in your work processes and culture. So the more we do this, the more it becomes second nature, and then like the cleaner and cleaner accessibility tests will come back for you. So, and 5, inform the community. So Drupal is an open source community. And if we do discover any accessibility issues in core contributed modules, we shouldn't keep it to ourselves. We should submit an issue, or if we fix the issue, like submit the issue with a patch, like we should be trying to improve it, because we can all get better if we are actively involved in the community. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions come to mind?
Just going back to one of your early slides, Ashley. So, like investigated, or do you have any awareness of any, groups in, in our case, the local Grand Rapids area, where I know for a while there was a hearing impaired group that would meet at the mall and just kind of hang out. So things like that, where there could be a pool of resources available for helping with things for people. Have you ever looked into that or heard of that? Or
well, in the Lansing area, there's this Accessibility group, and they try to collect people with disabilities to help with testing of things. But obviously they're in Lansing, but they have there's a testing lab that they have that they sometimes try to open that up for people. And they're also helping to train people with disabilities in technology so they can go and get tech jobs as well. As far as West Michigan goes, I'm not sure there's I don't know of any specific group, but I would love to see something in I know ICUS Life Enrichment Services has a lot of disability services, or, even Special Olympics Michigan are both kind of have some big presences in West Michigan, where there could be opportunities to reach out and create some type of group with them for testing.
Back to your comments on overlays, have any of the major organizations like WCAG or any of those made any formal statements about that being a bad idea that are good resources to point to if, say, a client decides that's how they want to go?
I will have to see if I can. I know that I'll see if I can find it in writing, I guess, because I know that there have been people, I've heard people from those organizations say things to that effect. And I know that the Association for the Blind, one of the big groups for the blind, they removed one of those overlay companies as a sponsor from their nationwide conference, because they did not believe they were in the spirit of people with disabilities, and they weren't working on behalf of them as human beings. So
okay.
I can find that statement, and I could see if I could find anything more official, but it is the general consensus that overlays are not a real solution. So
I think that would be an interesting and good resource, because I have one client, one site experience with this, where the site was rebuilt and they insisted we stick this overlay on, but it was originally as a just, this is a quick fix to get us at least some improvement. But then of course, there was no interest in going back and doing it right after that had been applied. So that's the danger also of, even starting, even agreeing to install those things is then that's good enough. Let's just leave it.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to see. One of the talks I attended was by a couple of lawyers, and they were kind of talking about all of the recent cases and just what was happening as far as accessibility in the law. And they actually brought up that an overlay was deemed not acceptable. And I'll have to see if I can find the court case that reflected that, because that could be another resource to directly say, see, here is proof it won't work.
Did you
Of
get the
course,
sense in that, like, that, and I think you touched on it in one of the early points, like it's becoming more and more the case that when it gets to the court, like they don't want to hear these excuses. Like it's 2022 for crying out loud. Is that kind of the attitude more and more in the court?
kind of, yeah. I mean, part of the issue is lack of concrete legislation to point to. So Title III of the ADA is like every aspect of like brick and mortar has to be accessible. And so all of these lawsuits are, does this digital product fall under that? And they've basically, the consensus has been, if you have any type of brick and mortar presence anywhere, then yes, your website has to be accessible. And I think 2.1 is what they're at now. They finally caught up to citing 2.1 instead of 2.0 of WCAG as the guidelines to follow. Yeah, it's interesting hearing about it, and it's kind of sad that we're kind of stuck kind of quibbling not about the real issue, but does this fall under this thing that was written 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago now, and that wasn't written to include it. So I'm really hoping that the Biden administration will get further than it appears they will get on legislation for digital accessibility.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And as always, if you have a topic that you are interested in hearing about at a future meetup, please leave that comment either in our meetup group or under the Facebook or the YouTube recording of this presentation. Thank you very much.